Hi, Pastor Nathan Decker with your hashtag Better Together devotion for today. This week we've been discussing the diversity of ways that we can read the Bible, that we can experience God in the holy text. I've talked about how we can see it as inspiring and inspired. I've talked about it as an ancient document. Some folks will look at the text, and there's a lot of folks who have made bestseller novels at this. They will look at the text as a code, or they will look at the Bible as if it's filled with symbolism and filled with things that we need to go and unpack with all of the understandings that we have of this. And nowhere is this done more than in the very last book of the Bible, the book of Revelation. Now, Revelation chapter 2, verse 29 says, "Let anyone who has ears to listen to what the Spirit is saying to the churches hear." So the idea is they're almost quoting Jesus here. Let anyone who has ears to hear. Let anyone who has that understand what I'm telling you. And in the book of Revelation in particular, there's all sorts of symbolism that is used. You have a seven-headed dragon, that probably is pointing towards the seven hills of Rome. You have all sorts of weird things that take place. You have someone who's got the mark of this mark of the beast. It's 666, which if you read a whole lot of symbolism goes into that, thinking that it's probably talking about Nero or an emperor like Nero that existed during that time. You see, there are tremendous amounts of symbolism within the Bible. The people who came out of this culture had symbols that matter to them. Just the same way that you and I, we have symbols that matter to us. If I talk about the red, white, and blue, if you're an American, you know immediately that I'm talking about our flag, and some thoughts of patriotism come to you because that is something that is symbolic in our culture, in our history. It's something that comes deep from within who we are. It's ingrained in our pride and our nation's story. But things happen along the way. 40 years ago, if I'd have said 9/11, you probably thought I was talking about a Porsche. But today, you hearken back to two towers in the Pentagon and another plane out in Pennsylvania, and other things happen. There are symbols that carry through the text. Now this was very true whenever you look at the Gospels or whether you look at the Old Testament. The number 7 always kind of means this idea of completion. The number 6, not so good. Another way of reading that 666 thing is something that's really, really not good or really, really not complete. There's all sorts of numbers that are symbols, but there are other symbols too. When Jesus is healing a man possessed by demons and he says his name is Legion, well, there's some symbolism there because Legion was this force, this occupying force from the Romans. That was what they called their army. There's some questions about what's going on there. Unpacking symbols is important. Now, I think you can go overboard with this. I'm being honest when I say this, because not everything has some mystical symbolism that's going to lead you to some new insight that no one else has had before. Notice that in all the instances that I've given you, I'm talking about symbolisms that are culturally relevant and culturally pinpointed from the culture of the Bible, similar to the ones that we had. So we're always looking backwards to find these symbols. You can look backwards and find the symbols, looking forwards for the symbols, on the other hand. I've heard somebody mention a passage in Revelation, and they thought, oh, surely John had seen a helicopter, and he was just describing it in an ancient way. Well, that's one way to read the text. It's not the way I choose to read the text, because that has someone looking at symbols and looking forward rather than backwards. And you can see anything you want to see when you go forwards, because we haven't seen it yet. When we look backwards, somebody told me hindsight's 20/20. I choose to read, when I read the Bible, as symbolic. I choose to read it through the symbolism of the cultures that put together the Bible. Of course, that requires some higher criticism. That requires some research. That requires some trust in some experts. I encourage you to do this because it adds so much to your reading. The prophet Amos one time has this beautiful place where God says, Amos, what do you see? And Amos says, I see a fruit basket. And God says, you're right, destruction to Israel, destruction to Jerusalem. And you're like, what just happened? Because in the English translation, it doesn't work so well. But understanding some of the symbolism that was going on And also understanding that the word destruction and fruit basket are homophones, words that sound alike but have different meanings, in the Hebrew language makes more sense. Suddenly that verse is unpacked for me in a beautiful way that I didn't see it before. Do some research when you're reading the Bible. Do some research about what the text is saying, and you'll find so much more beautiful things, so much more symbolism, so much more deepness in what you are reading, and it adds to your spirit. Amen.